My name is Audrey, 33 years old, and on my 28th birthday, I caught my husband in our bed with my best friend. 5 years later, at my cousin's opulent Hamptons wedding, he cornered me to say that leaving me was his best move. Seconds later, a 5-year-old girl ran through the crowd, hugged my legs, and cried out for her mommy right before the billionaire chairman of a massive investment fund walked in to claim us both. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to watch the people who betrayed you get exactly what they deserve. The string quartet played Vivaldi notes floating over the manicured lawns of the Hamptons estate. Waiters in crisp white linen glided through the New York elite carrying silver trays of caviar and champagne. It was my cousin Megan's wedding, a spectacle of wealth my parents had spent decades trying to claw their way into. I had not seen my family in 5 years, not since the night I was thrown out of my own life. I stood near the Grand Marquis, adjusting the strap of my obscenely expensive navy blue Tom Ford slip dress. I was 33 now, and the desperate-to-please girl they discarded half a decade ago was dead. I had spent those 5 years building a financial empire, becoming a senior partner at a venture capital firm in Manhattan. But to my family, I was still the disgraced, infertile ex-wife who could not keep her husband happy. I grabbed a champagne flute from a passing tray when a harsh voice cut through the chatter. It was a grating baritone I used to wake up next to every morning. Well, well, if it isn't the ghost of failures past. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my cold champagne before finally turning around to face him. Standing there, radiating unearned arrogance, was Jason, my ex-husband. He wore a custom tuxedo that fit too snugly, holding a glass of bourbon. Clinging to his arm like a tailored accessory was Nicole, my former best friend, the woman I had caught in my bed on my 28th birthday. Jason, I said, my voice perfectly level, devoid of any emotional inflection. I see the years have not done much to improve your taste in company. Nicole's cosmetically enhanced smile tightened. She patted her slightly rounded stomach, a diamond tennis necklace glittering against her collarbone. Audrey, we honestly did not think you would have the nerve to show your face here, considering everything. She let the sentence hang, her eyes scanning my simple dress, clearly missing the high-end tailoring. She thought I was struggling to survive. Considering what Nicole, I asked, maintaining unwavering eye contact. Considering that this family decided infidelity was a forgivable offense as long as the man committing it had a promising business plan, I assure you my nerve is completely intact. Jason let out a loud scoff, making nearby guests turn their heads. Still bitter, I see. It is truly tragic, really. You are 33, Audrey, still alone, showing up to family events without a +1, still holding a grudge because you could not keep a man satisfied. He took a smug sip of his bourbon, his eyes raking over me with a mixture of pity and contempt. Look at you. 5 years later, and leaving you was undeniably my best move. I smiled. It was not a defensive smile. It was the smile of an apex predator watching a mouse walk willingly into a trap. Your best move, Jason. That is a fascinating perspective. It is the truth, Nicole chimed in, leaning against Jason's shoulder. Jason is a CEO now. We just closed a Series B funding round for his tech startup. $50 million, Audrey. $50 million. We are buying a penthouse in Tribeca next month. And you, last we heard from your mother, you were working some miserable entry-level accounting job in the city, renting a tiny, depressing shoebox. I swirled the champagne in my glass, watching the bubbles rise to the surface. An accountant. Right. My mother always had a vivid imagination for minimizing me. Do not be jealous, sweetie, Nicole cooed, stepping forward. Her voice dripped with venom masked as pity. It is not your fault you could not provide Jason with what he needed. Some women are built to be wives and mothers. Others are built to sit in cubicles and crunch numbers. It is a shame about your medical condition, though. I suppose your infertility was a blessing in disguise. At least Jason did not have to fight for custody when he realized I could give him a real family. The words were designed to gut me. 5 years ago, my supposed fertility issues became the catalyst for Jason's blatant disrespect. My parents demanded I forgive him, claiming a successful man needed an heir and that a barren woman had no right to make demands. They chose his wealth over my dignity. I looked at Nicole's pregnant stomach, then up to her smug eyes. A family. How beautiful. I am sure your child will be thrilled to know their foundation was built on the mattress of their father's first marriage. Jason's face flushed red, his faux charming demeanor slipping. He took a step toward me, invading my personal space. Watch your mouth, Audrey. I am about to revolutionize the tech industry. My investors would buy and sell your pathetic accounting firm before breakfast. You were a dead weight dragging me down, and the moment I cut you loose, I skyrocketed. Skyrocketed, I repeated, letting the word roll off my tongue. Is that what you call securing funding based on fake metrics? Jason instantly froze. His arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by cold panic. What the hell are you talking about, Audrey? I took a slow sip of my cold champagne, savoring the absolute terror washing over his face. You know exactly what I am talking about, Jason. Client acquisition costs magically dropping right before a funding round. Revenue streams appearing out of thin air. It is amazing what a few shell companies can do for a pitch deck. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper so the wealthy guests around us would not hear. Who have you been talking to? Are you stalking my employees? You are insane. You are a bitter, lonely accountant making up lies because you cannot handle my success. She gripped his arm, looking nervously at the nearby socialites. Jason, ignore her. She is just trying to cause a scene. She wants to ruin our day because she has nothing else. I have plenty, Nicole. I just do not need to steal my best friend's husband to get it. The tension was palpable. People were pretending to admire the floral arrangements while desperately listening to our conversation. Suddenly, a high-pitched, joyful voice pierced through the tense atmosphere. Mommy. The crowd parted as a tiny blur of pink tulle and white lace sprinted across the manicured lawn. 5-year-old Lily, her dark curls bouncing, barreled past Jason, completely ignoring him. She slammed into my legs, wrapping her small arms around my knees and burying her face in the fabric of my dress. Mommy, I missed you. Daddy said I had to wait in the car with the driver until he finished a call, but I wanted to find you. I handed my champagne flute to a passing waiter and knelt down, scooping Lily into my arms. I smoothed her curls, kissing her cheek. I missed you too, my little princess. You look so beautiful in your dress. I stood up, holding Lily effortlessly on my hip. I turned back to Jason and Nicole. Their jaws had practically unhinged. They stared at the 5-year-old girl in my arms, their eyes darting between Lily's face and mine. Jason's face twisted into a mask of furious, self-righteous indignation. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice booming across the lawn, ensuring every guest within 50 feet turned to look. You lying witch, he spat. A 5-year-old. She is 5. You told everyone you were infertile. You were cheating on me before we even divorced. You hid a child from the family. The sheer volume of Jason's accusation acted like a magnet for the worst people in my life. The music from the string quartet seemed to fade into the background as a heavy, oppressive silence fell over our section of the lawn. What is the meaning of this? The shrill, demanding voice belonged to my mother, Diana. She marched through the crowd of spectators, her heels sinking slightly into the grass. She wore a dress that was aggressively bright for a wedding. Trailing right behind her was my father Richard, his face set in a permanent scowl of disapproval. Diana stopped dead in her tracks when she saw Lily resting comfortably on my hip. Her eyes, magnified by her heavy makeup, widened in absolute horror. She did not look at me with the surprise of a grandmother seeing a grandchild for the first time. She looked at me like I had just dragged a bag of garbage into a Michelin-starred restaurant. Audrey, Diana shrieked, clutching the pearls at her neck. What is this? Whose child is this? You bring a bastard to your cousin Megan's wedding. Are you actively trying to humiliate us in front of the Hamptons elite? Have you not disgraced this family enough? I adjusted Lily on my hip, entirely unfazed by my mother's theatrics. Hello to you too, Mother. It has been 5 years, and I see you are still treating every family gathering like a community theater audition. Richard stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Jason's shoulder. He looked at Jason with more paternal affection than he had ever shown me in my entire life. Jason's son, are you all right? He then turned his furious gaze on me. You listen to me, Audrey. Jason is a $1 million CEO now. He is the pride of this family, the kind of man your sister and your cousins look up to. And you show up here after 5 years of silence, parading a child born of your own infidelity, trying to ruin his reputation. My infidelity. I laughed, a sharp, genuine sound that echoed over the lawn. Dad, are you experiencing early onset dementia? 5 years ago, I walked into my apartment and found your $1 million CEO sweating on top of my best friend. But I suppose in this family, a man's bank account buys his absolution, does it not? Jason is a visionary, Richard roared, pointing a thick finger at my face. He had pressures you could not understand, and clearly you were out sleeping around behind his back. Apologize to him right now. Apologize to Jason and Nicole. Hand that child over to a nanny and leave this estate before I have security. Throw you out. Yeah, Audrey, listen to your father. The sneering nasal voice belonged to my younger sister Brianna, the undisputed golden child. She swaggered into the circle, a glass of champagne in one hand, heavily pregnant. Right beside her was her husband DeAndre. DeAndre was a tall, imposing African-American man wearing a bespoke suit that screamed new money. He was Jason's chief financial officer, the right-hand man who handled the numbers for their supposedly booming tech startup. He possessed an arrogance that rivaled Jason's, fueled by a relentless desire to prove he belonged in these ultra-wealthy circles. DeAndre looked me up and down, a smirk playing on his lips. Audrey, still playing the victim, I see. I do not know what little accounting firm you are pushing pencils for in New York, but let me give you some advice. The financial sector in this city is very, very small. I sit in rooms with venture capitalists who control billions. I snap my fingers, and that pathetic little desk job of yours evaporates. Show some respect to your betters, or I will make sure you cannot even get a job balancing books at a local diner. I looked at DeAndre, feeling a surge of pure, icy adrenaline. This was it. This was the moment I had waited 5 years for. I stroked Lily's back to keep her calm. My betters. That is an interesting choice of words, DeAndre. Tell me, does a better man falsify quarterly revenue projections to trick venture capital firms into funding his CEO's vanity project? DeAndre's smirk faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered, masking his unease with loud bravado. You are crazy. You do not know the first thing about corporate finance. We just secured $50 million in Series B funding. We are untouchable right now. Brianna let out a cruel, high-pitched giggle, stepping closer to interject. Oh, leave her alone, DeAndre. She is just so jealous. She is jealous because she is a single mother working a dead-end job while we are thriving. In fact, Audrey, you should be thanking us. Mom and Dad remortgaged their house, the one you grew up in, to provide the seed money for Jason and DeAndre's company. We are about to close on a mansion in Beverly Hills. Mom and Dad are retiring early. We are living the dream you threw away. I stared at my parents, letting the sheer absurdity of Brianna's statement hang in the air. The surrounding crowd of wedding guests had stopped pretending to mingle. They were practically pressing in champagne glasses, paused halfway to their mouths, whispering behind manicured hands. You mortgaged the family home, I asked, my voice carrying clearly over the hushed whispers of the Hamptons elite. You put your entire retirement on the line for Jason's startup. Yes, we did, Diana said, proudly lifting her chin and looking around at the audience she thought was on her side. Because Jason and DeAndre know how to multiply wealth, they guarantee a 300% return on our investment by the end of the fiscal year. They are taking care of this family, something you never did. A 300% return, I repeated. The sarcasm in my voice was heavy enough to cut glass. Fascinating. DeAndre? How exactly are you generating a 300% return for early investors when your client acquisition cost is currently outpacing your lifetime value per user by a ratio of 4-to-1? And how are you hiding the $15 million you and Jason routed through 3 separate shell companies in the Cayman Islands last month? The air was instantly sucked out of the space. The string quartet was still playing, but the silence among our group was deafening. The whispers from the crowd turned into audible gasps. Venture capitalists and hedge fund managers in the audience instantly recognized the terminology I was using. They knew exactly what those numbers meant. Jason's face drained of color. He looked at DeAndre. DeAndre looked at Jason, a bead of sweat suddenly forming on his forehead, his tailored suit suddenly looking very stifling. How? Jason swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. How do you know those terms? Where did you hear those numbers? I know a lot of numbers, Jason, I said calmly. I stroked Lily's back, feeling perfectly at peace. I also know that 5 years ago you threw me out because I caught you with my best friend, and my own parents told me to get over it because you were a promising businessman. Now you are just a fraud bleeding my parents dry. Furious that the spotlight had shifted from his superiority to sudden corporate panic, Jason lost what little composure he had left. The humiliation of being exposed in front of his new high society peers was too much. You hacking witch, he snarled. He lunged forward, raising his hand fully intending to grab my arm, or perhaps even strike me right in front of the entire wedding party. He never made it. Before Jason's hand could even graze my shoulder, a massive, impeccably tailored arm shot out from behind me. A large hand clamped down on Jason's wrist with the force of an industrial vice. The sudden movement caused the cuff of a crisp white dress shirt to pull back, revealing a limited edition Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. It was a watch worth more than the entire catering budget of this wedding. Jason let out a sharp gasp of pain, his knees buckling slightly as the grip on his wrist tightened. He looked up, his furious eyes meeting a gaze so cold and commanding, it seemed to freeze the very air around us. Dominic had arrived. At 38, Dominic possessed the kind of effortless, terrifying power that could not be faked or bought with a cheap startup loan. He stood at 6'3", broad-shouldered and sharp-jawed, radiating absolute authority. He did not just walk into a room, he owned it. Dominic did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He spoke in a low, gravelly tone that carried a lethal promise. Who gave you permission to raise a hand to my wife? He shoved Jason's arm back with a flick of his wrist, sending my ex-husband stumbling backward into Nicole. She let out a startled squeak and barely managed to keep him from falling into the champagne tower. Dominic immediately stepped in front of me, shielding both me and Lily. He gently placed a large, warm hand on Lily's head. Daddy, Lily squealed, reaching her arms out to him. Dominic's hardened face softened instantly. He kissed her forehead before turning his glacial stare back to the group of people who had just spent the last 10 minutes attempting to verbally tear me apart. Richard. My father stepped up. He tried to puff out his chest to regain control of the situation. He looked Dominic up and down, his eyes lingering on the expensive watch, but his ego refused to let him back down. And who the hell are you, wife daddy? Audrey, what is this nonsense? Did you rent an actor from Manhattan to come down here and pretend to be your husband so you would not look like a pathetic single failure at your cousin's wedding? Brianna snorted, covering her mouth to hide a laugh. Oh my God, Dad, you are right. She totally hired an escort. Audrey, this is beyond pathetic. You bring a fake kid and a fake husband just to compete with Jason. I rested my hand on Dominic's back, feeling the solid muscle beneath his suit jacket. Brianna, your dedication to being confidently incorrect is the only consistent thing about you. While my parents and sister were busy mocking the situation, I noticed DeAndre, the swaggering, arrogant CFO who had just threatened to ruin my little accounting job, was no longer laughing. He was staring at Dominic. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked as if he were staring at an executioner. DeAndre took a slow, trembling step backward, bumping into a cocktail table. The glasses rattled loudly in the quiet space. DeAndre, what is wrong with you? Brianna snapped, annoyed that her husband was not joining in on the humiliation. Tell this rent-a-suit to get out of our way. DeAndre did not look at his wife. He could not take his eyes off Dominic. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. Shut up, Brianna, he hissed, his voice cracking. Just shut your damn mouth. Jason frowned, rubbing his bruised wrist. DeAndre, what the hell is your problem? Call security and get this guy out of here. Jason, DeAndre stammered, raising a shaking hand. Jason, you do not know who that is. Do you? I do not care if he is the governor. Jason spat. He assaulted me. DeAndre looked like he was about to vomit. He practically folded in on himself. That is Dominic. Dominic Prescott, the founder and chairman of Vanguard Group. The name Vanguard Group hung over the lawn like a live grenade. The firm managed tens of billions in assets. More importantly, to Jason and DeAndre, Vanguard Group was the lead investor in their Series B funding. They were the exact firm that had wired $50 million into their corporate accounts just 3 days ago. Diana's mouth fell open in a silent gasp. Richard's aggressive posture instantly deflated his arms, dropping to his sides. Nicole clutched her diamond necklace, looking between Jason and Dominic in absolute horror. Jason's face morphed into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The realization hit him like a freight train. He was standing face to face with the man who essentially owned his entire company, the man who held his future, his wealth, and his precious CEO title in the palm of his hand. Immediately, Jason's survival instincts kicked in. The slimy, sycophantic reflexes of a desperate salesman took over. He plastered on a sickeningly fake smile and stepped forward, offering a hand that was visibly shaking. Mr. Prescott. Sir. My God, it is an absolute honor to meet you. I am Jason, CEO of Nexus Tech. Your firm just led our Series B. We are so incredibly grateful for your trust in our vision. I had no idea you were attending this wedding. Dominic did not look at Jason's extended hand. He just stared at Jason's face. Jason nervously withdrew his hand, wiping it on his trousers. He then pointed at me, trying to throw me under the bus to save his own skin. Sir, I have to apologize for the scene. This woman, Audrey, she is my ex-wife. She is severely mentally unstable. She has been stalking me, harassing my family. She is a compulsive liar. Whatever she told you to get you to pretend to be with her, it is a lie. She is a barren, bitter woman who could not handle that I moved on to a better life. Please do not let her instability reflect poorly on my company. Dominic let out a low, dark chuckle. The sound was terrifying. It was not a laugh of amusement. It was the sound of a predator cornering its prey. You think my wife is a liar? Dominic asked, his voice deathly quiet. You think she hired me? Well, sir, with all due respect. It is obvious, Jason stammered, sweating profusely now. Audrey is just a low-level accountant. There is no way a woman of her status could possibly run in your circles, let alone be married to the chairman of Vanguard. Dominic turned his head slowly to look at me, a genuine, loving smile touching the corners of his mouth. Audrey, darling, it seems your ex-husband has not bothered to read the corporate structuring documents of the firm that just bought his life. I smiled back at Dominic, then shifted my gaze to Jason. The absolute terror in his eyes was intoxicating. Jason! I said, my voice echoing clearly across the silent lawn. Dominic is the chairman of Vanguard Group. That is true. But Dominic focuses on global acquisitions. He does not handle the domestic tech startup portfolios. Do you know who does? Jason just stared at me, his breathing shallow, his eyes darting frantically. I do, I said. Dominic did not approve the $50 million for your company, Jason. The senior partner, the head of domestic ventures, and the majority shareholder of Vanguard Group, who personally signed off on your funding, is me. The silence that followed was absolute. For 10 agonizing seconds, the only sound on the Hamptons estate was the distant crash of the ocean waves and the oblivious playing of the string quartet. I watched the color drain entirely from my father's face. My mother gripped the edge of a cocktail table to keep from collapsing. Nicole let out a high-pitched strangled gasp, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Brianna, the sister who had just mocked me for being a single mother working a dead-end job, looked as though she had been physically struck. But Jason and DeAndre's reactions were the most profound. They were not just shocked, they were watching their entire existence evaporate before their eyes. No, Jason whispered, shaking his head rapidly in denial. No, that is impossible. The partner who signed the term sheet was A. Prescott, a managing partner named Prescott. Audrey Prescott. I corrected smoothly, tapping the side of my head. It is amazing what happens when you take your maiden name, marry a billionaire, and merge your own highly successful independent portfolio with his. I dropped your last name the minute the ink dried on our divorce papers 5 years ago. Did you really think I spent half a decade weeping in a cubicle? You broke my heart, Jason, but in doing so, you handed me the fuel I needed to conquer New York. I turned to the nearest catering table where I had placed my designer clutch earlier. From inside it, I pulled out a thick bound folder sealed with a red confidential sticker. I tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy authoritative thud. I told you I know a lot of numbers, Jason. When your little startup applied for funding at Vanguard, my team brought the file to my desk. I recognized the name immediately. Dominic wanted to reject it outright on principle, but I told him no. I said, "Let us see what my ex-husband has been up to." So I approved the initial due diligence phase, and what I found was truly spectacular. DeAndre let out a guttural groan, burying his face in his hands. Oh my God, the forensic audit. You ran a forensic audit. A highly invasive, untraceable forensic audit. I confirmed, my eyes locking onto DeAndre. You two boys got greedy. You knew your actual user engagement was dropping by 20% month over month. So DeAndre, as the brilliant CFO, you created 3 ghost entities to artificially pump money back into your own revenue streams, making it look like explosive organic growth. Jason was trembling now, his hands shaking so violently he had to put his bourbon glass down. Audrey, please, we can talk about this. We can explain. There is nothing to explain, Jason. I continued, my voice raising just enough to carry to the expanding circle of wealthy onlookers. Because the inflated metrics were just the appetizer. The main course was the $15 million. The minute our $50 million hit your corporate accounts on Wednesday, you and DeAndre initiated wire transfers to offshore accounts in the Caymans. Accounts disguised as vendor payouts for server architecture that does not exist. Nicole turned to Jason, her eyes wide with frantic horror. Jason, what is she talking about? You said the money was for the company expansion. You said that is how we were paying for the Tribeca penthouse. Shut up, Nicole! Jason snapped, his veneer of control completely shattered. He looked back at me, tears of desperation welling in his eyes. Audrey, you cannot do this. I will give it back. I will reverse the wires. Just keep this in-house. Please, for the sake of the family. Family. I echoed, letting out a sharp, incredulous laugh. I looked over at my parents. Richard and Diana were trembling. Are you talking about the same family that told me to get over catching you in my bed? The family that called me a broken baron. Disappointment. I pointed at the thick folder on the table. That file contains every forged signature, every falsified tax return, and every illegal wire transfer you and DeAndre authorized. And as the lead investor, I have a fiduciary duty to report fraud. I checked the face of my watch, which is exactly why an hour ago I filed a formal complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC has already issued an emergency federal injunction. Your company accounts are frozen. Your personal accounts are frozen. You do not have $50 million, Jason. You do not even have 50 cents to buy a cup of coffee. Nicole let out a piercing scream that shattered the remaining decorum of the wedding reception. No, the penthouse. The closing is on Monday. We put down a non-refundable $2 million deposit. Jason, tell me she is lying. Tell me we still have the money. Jason aggressively shoved Nicole away, his face twisted in a hideous mixture of rage and terror. Get off me! You knew about the offshore accounts. You are the one who demanded the Tribeca penthouse. I did not know you stole it! She shrieked back, her pristine image entirely shattered as she stumbled backward into a waiter, sending a tray of champagne glasses crashing to the grass. DeAndre collapsed onto his knees on the manicured lawn. He grabbed his chest, hyperventilating his custom-tailored suit, suddenly looking like a prison uniform. Brianna, clutching her pregnant belly, lunged toward me. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin with desperate force. Audrey, please. You cannot do this. I am pregnant. DeAndre is going to be a father. You cannot send the father of your niece or nephew to jail just because you are holding a grudge against Jason. I calmly pried her fingers off my arm one by one, looking at her with absolute detachment. I am not sending him to jail, Brianna. His own greed is sending him to jail. And do not you dare use your unborn child as a shield for federal crimes. You stood there 5 minutes ago and bragged about moving to Beverly Hills on money your husband stole from my firm. Your child will just have to learn a very difficult lesson early in life. Actions have consequences. My father Richard suddenly surged forward. His face was purple veins bulging in his neck. But he was not angry at Jason or DeAndre for their deception. He was angry at me. Audrey, stop this right now, he demanded, his voice thick with panic and fury. Do you realize what you have done? Diana and I remortgaged this estate. We put our entire retirement savings into their company. $4 million. If the SEC freezes the assets, if the company goes under, we lose the house. We lose everything. I stared at the man who had cast me out of his life 5 years ago. I know, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm. I saw your names on the capitalization table during the audit. I saw exactly how much you invested. Diana fell to her knees next to DeAndre, sobbing uncontrollably. Her perfect makeup ran down her face in dark streaks, ruining her aggressively bright dress. Audrey, please, we are your parents. We gave you life. You cannot let the bank take our home. You have billions. You can stop the SEC. You can cover the losses. Please, we are blood. I stepped back, leaning into Dominic, who wrapped his arm protectively around my waist. Lily was safely tucked against his chest, shielded from the chaos. Blood, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. 5 years ago, when I was sitting on the floor of my apartment crying because my husband had betrayed me with my best friend, I begged you for support. I begged you to stand by me. Do you remember what you said to me? Dad? Richard stared at me, his lips trembling, unable to form a word. You told me that failures do not belong in this family, I said, reciting the exact words that had haunted my nightmares for years. You told me that Jason was a winner and I was a liability. You chose the winner. Well, congratulations, Dad. You backed your winner. Now you get to pay for his losses. The sheer brutality of my statement hung over the lawn like a guillotine. There was no coming back from it. The absolute destruction of the toxic dynamic that had governed my entire existence was complete. Dominic adjusted Lily in his arms and spoke up, his deep voice slicing through the crying and the chaos. Thinking of making a run for it, Jason, I would not advise it. Audrey left out a minor detail about our protocol for dealing with corporate embezzlement. DeAndre snapped his head up, his eyes bloodshot. What protocol? What did you do when you steal $15 million from a federally regulated venture capital fund and wire it offshore? Dominic explained, checking his limited edition watch. Again, it triggers an automatic alert with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, White Collar Crime Division. They do not just freeze your accounts, they come for your passports. Right on cue, the sound of heavy tires crunching on the gravel driveway echoed through the quiet estate. The massive wrought iron gates swung open. 3 black unmarked SUVs rolled onto the property, their red and blue grille lights flashing silently. Panic erupted among the wedding guests. High society socialites, venture capitalists, and hedge fund managers scattered like insects, pulling out their phones, desperate to distance themselves from the unfolding spectacle. 4 men in dark suits and windbreakers bearing the FBI insignia stepped out of the vehicles. They walked onto the lawn with grim purpose, parting the crowd with ease. The lead agent, a tall man with a stern face, zeroed in on our group. Jason Sterling and DeAndre Washington, the agent asked, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Jason took a step backward, raising his hands in a futile gesture of surrender. Wait, please. I have lawyers. I can explain the wire transfers. It was a bridging loan. It was not embezzlement. You can explain it to the federal magistrate. Mr. Sterling, the agent said coldly, grabbing Jason's arm and twisting it behind his back with practiced efficiency. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. DeAndre did not fight. He just hung his head, offering his wrist to the second agent. Brianna was hyperventilating now, clinging to DeAndre's sleeve. "You cannot take him. He is my husband. We are moving to Beverly Hills. You are moving to a federal holding facility, ma'am. If you interfere with an arrest," the agent warned, stepping between them. Richard stumbled forward, looking like a hollow shell of the domineering tyrant who had ruled my life. He looked at the FBI agents, then at Jason, and finally at me. "Audrey. Audrey, tell them. Tell them your mother and I did not know. We just invested. We did not know about the fraud. Please do not let them take us." I looked at the man who had called me a failure, who had demanded I pack my bags and leave the family because I was an inconvenience to his social climbing. I felt nothing. No pity, no sorrow, no anger. Just total, absolute indifference. "You will not be arrested, Dad," I said calmly. "Ignorance is not a federal crime. It just makes you bankrupt. You will lose the estate. The bank will foreclose within 90 days. I suggest you start looking for a one-bedroom apartment in a more affordable zip code." I turned my back on them. I did not want to watch them cry. I did not need to see Jason being shoved into the back of an SUV or Nicole screaming on the lawn. The execution was complete. The poison had been excised. Dominic adjusted Lily in his arms, his hand coming to rest on the small of my back. "Are we finished here, Mrs. Prescott?" I looked up at him, a genuine smile breaking across my face. "Yes, Mr. Prescott, we are entirely finished." We walked together across the lawn, away from the screaming, the flashing lights, and the utter ruin of the people who had tried to break me. We bypassed the gawking wedding guests, making our way down the long driveway to where our black Maybach was parked, the engine quietly purring. As Dominic opened the door for me, I paused and looked back at the grand estate one last time. It was no longer a symbol of my inadequacy. It was just a house that belonged to strangers. I slid into the plush leather seat of the car, pulling Lily onto my lap. She yawned, resting her head against my chest, completely oblivious to the fact that her mother had just dismantled an empire of lies. Dominic slid in beside me, the heavy door closing, shutting out the noise of the outside world completely. "To the airfield, sir?" the driver asked. "Yes," Dominic replied, intertwining his fingers with mine. "Take us home." Exactly 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of our private villa in Lake Como, Italy, watching the morning sun glitter across the water. Dominic was inside making breakfast with Lily, their laughter drifting out into the cool air. The aftermath of my cousin's wedding had played out exactly as I orchestrated. Jason and DeAndre were both convicted of federal wire fraud and securities fraud. They each received 10-year sentences in a federal penitentiary. Without Jason's stolen wealth to fund her lifestyle, Nicole quickly filed for divorce. She was left drowning in legal fees and credit card debt, eventually forced to take a minimum wage job as a waitress to survive. My parents faced a brutal reality. With their retirement savings completely wiped out by the SEC asset freeze, the bank foreclosed on their Hamptons estate and their primary residence. The social elite they so desperately tried to impress abandoned them overnight. They now live in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Brianna moved in with them after DeAndre went to prison, raising her child in the very environment she used to mock. They tried to contact me countless times, leaving desperate voicemails begging for forgiveness, begging for financial help, pleading with me to remember that we were blood. I changed my number and blocked their emails. I realized that blood means absolutely nothing when it is toxic. Family is not determined by DNA. Family is composed of the people who stand by you when you have nothing and who celebrate you when you win. I refused to lower my worth to fit into a cage built by people who never truly loved me. Have you ever had to stand up against your own flesh and blood to protect your peace? How did you fight back against a toxic family? Let me know your story in the comments section below. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel to hear more stories of people taking their power back. Remember, your future is always worth fighting for. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sharp tang of impending disaster. My mother had barely finished her screeching tirade about my supposed bastard child when my father decided it was his turn to take control. Richard pushed his way past Diana, his heavy footsteps crushing the manicured grass. His face was a deep shade of crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against the tight collar of his custom tuxedo. He positioned himself squarely between me and Jason, acting as a human shield for the man who had destroyed my marriage. "You listen to me, Audrey!" Richard barked, his voice carrying the harsh, commanding tone he used to terrify his subordinates at his firm. He pointed a thick, trembling finger directly at my face, completely ignoring the terrified 5-year-old girl clinging to my dress. "I will not stand here and allow you to hurl baseless, slanderous accusations at this man. Do you have any idea who you are talking to?" I looked at Jason. He was now standing taller, a smug, vindicated smirk spreading across his face as my own father rushed to his defense. Jason adjusted the cuffs of his jacket, soaking in the protective shadow of my family. He loved this. He loved watching the people who were supposed to love me tear me down to elevate him. "I am fully aware of who I am talking to, Dad," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "I am talking to a man who violated his wedding vows in my own home. A man who relies on smoke and mirrors to impress people who are desperate enough to believe his lies." "Shut your mouth!" Richard roared, the sound echoing across the reception. Several guests from the surrounding tables gasped, taking half steps backward, their champagne flutes trembling in their hands. The whispers grew louder, a collective hum of wealthy socialites feasting on the drama. "You know nothing about success, Audrey," Richard continued, his volume rising. "You know nothing about what it takes to build an empire. Jason is a $1 million CEO. He is a visionary. He just secured $50 million from one of the most ruthless venture capital firms on the East Coast. He is building something that will change the world. And what are you doing? You are standing here spewing bitter lies because you are too small-minded to accept your own failures." Richard turned slightly, placing a heavy, affectionate hand on Jason's shoulder. It was a gesture of paternal pride, a gesture I had spent my entire childhood begging for, but had never received. "Jason is the true pride of this family," Richard declared loudly, ensuring the onlookers heard every single word. "He is the son I always wanted, a man of ambition, a man of focus. He had the strength to cut loose a dead weight that was holding him back. He made the right choice, and his success is the absolute proof of that." Nicole let out a soft, triumphant sigh, leaning her head against Jason's arm. "Thank you, Richard," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "It has been so hard dealing with her jealousy. We just want to move on and focus on our bright future together." I stared at the three of them, a perfect tableau of shared delusion. "The pride of this family," I repeated, letting the words hang in the humid air. "Tell me, Dad, is your pride rooted in his brilliant mind, or in the fact that his new wealth gives you something to brag about at your country club dinners? You always did love a shiny object regardless of how tarnished it was on the inside." Richard's face contorted with absolute fury. He stepped so close to me I could smell the stale scotch on his breath. "You are a disgrace, Audrey. You were a failure as a wife. You failed to give this man a child. You failed to keep him satisfied. And instead of bowing out with dignity, instead of taking your meager accounting salary and living quietly in the shadows where you belong, you bring this child here to ruin your cousin's wedding. You bring a living, breathing symbol of your own infidelity just to spite the man who outgrew you. This child," I said, my voice dropping an octave, carrying a lethal warning, "is my daughter. And if you raise your voice at her again, you will find out exactly what kind of power I hold." "Power?" Richard laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You have no power, Audrey. You are a bitter, lonely woman standing in a borrowed dress. You are going to do exactly as I say. You are going to turn around, face Jason and Nicole, and you are going to apologize. You will apologize for your lies. You will apologize for your jealousy. And you will apologize for trying to ruin the best day of their lives." "I will do no such thing," I replied, smoothing Lily's dark curls to keep her calm. "You will apologize," Richard demanded, his voice reaching a fever pitch. "And then you will take this child. You will walk out of those gates and you will leave immediately. You will leave this estate to save whatever tiny shred of face you have left. If you do not walk away right now, I will personally call security and have you dragged out of here like a common trespasser." Jason stepped out from behind my father, his confidence fully restored by Richard's aggressive defense. "You heard him, Audrey. It is time for you to go. You do not belong here. You never did. This is a space for winners, for people who are actually building a future. Go back to your little apartment and leave the adults to their celebration." I looked around the circle. My mother, Diana, was nodding vigorously in agreement with Richard. Nicole was smiling a wicked, triumphant smile, her hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly. Jason was standing tall, puffing his chest out, completely emboldened by my family's betrayal. And my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, was pointing toward the exit, his eyes filled with nothing but contempt. "Save face," I murmured, a genuine relaxed smile finally breaking across my face. "You want me to leave to save face? Dad, you are so incredibly blinded by the illusion of wealth that you cannot see the absolute disaster standing right next to you. You call him a $1 million CEO. You call him a visionary. You demand that I apologize to a man who is currently standing on a house of cards constructed entirely of federal wire fraud and fabricated user metrics." Richard slammed his fist onto a nearby cocktail table, making the glasses jump and spill clear liquid onto the white linen. "Enough, I will not listen to another word of your insane jealousy." "Security!" he bellowed, turning his head toward the estate guard station near the Grand Marquis. "Security! We have a trespasser." I did not flinch. I did not move toward the exit. I simply shifted Lily's weight on my hip and stared back at my father with icy resolve. "Call them, Dad!" I challenged him, my voice ringing out clear and sharp above the murmurs of the crowd. "Call security. Bring them over here. Let them witness exactly what happens when you try to forcibly remove the woman who actually holds the keys to your entire financial existence. Because I assure you, the moment you put a hand on me, the illusion you are so desperately defending will shatter into a million pieces." Richard froze his hand, hovering mid-air, his face twitching with a mixture of rage and sudden, inexplicable hesitation. My absolute lack of fear unsettled him. Before he could summon the breath to shout for the guards again, a sharp, theatrical laugh sliced through the heavy tension of the garden. It was Brianna. My younger sister, the undisputed golden child of the family, swaggered into our fractured circle. She was heavily pregnant, yet poured into a skin-tight emerald gown that screamed for attention. She held a crystal flute of sparkling water in one hand, her other arm linked securely through the elbow of her husband, DeAndre. DeAndre was a tall, imposing African-American man who wore his newfound wealth like a weapon. His bespoke charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, his silk tie knotted with aggressive precision, and his posture radiated the insufferable arrogance of a man who believed he had just conquered the universe. As Jason's chief financial officer, DeAndre was the supposed mastermind behind the numbers that had propelled their tech startup into the stratosphere. Together, Brianna and DeAndre were the ultimate power couple in my parents' eyes, the living, breathing antithesis to my supposed failure. Brianna looked me up and down, her nose wrinkling in performative disgust. "Oh my God, Dad, she actually believes her own delusions," Brianna sneered, shaking her head. "Audrey, this is beyond pathetic. You show up here uninvited, dragging some random child with you, and now you are threatening Dad. What exactly is going to shatter your ego? Because from where I am standing, you have absolutely nothing left to lose." I kept my grip firm and reassuring on Lily, who had buried her face in my shoulder. I looked at my sister, feeling a profound sense of detachment. "Brianna," I said softly, "your dedication to being confidently incorrect is the only consistent thing about your entire existence." Brianna gasped, her face flushing with indignation, but DeAndre stepped forward before she could fire back. He placed a calming hand on his wife's shoulder, projecting the image of a rational, highly successful executive dealing with an unruly subordinate. He looked at me with eyes full of cold, calculating disdain. "Let me handle this, Brie," DeAndre said, his voice a smooth, dangerous baritone. He turned his full attention to me, adjusting his expensive suit jacket. "Audrey, it has been a long time. I was hoping the years might have brought you some humility, but I see you are still playing the bitter victim." I met his gaze effortlessly. "And I see you are still playing the role of Jason's lapdog, DeAndre." Tell me, does it get tiring cleaning up his messes, or does the compensation package make the humiliation worthwhile? DeAndre chuckled a dry, humorless sound. He stepped closer, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me. You have a sharp tongue for someone standing so close to the edge of a cliff. I do not know what tiny, pathetic little accounting firm you are pushing pencils for in New York, but you need a serious reality check. You are not in some suburban sandbox anymore. You have stepped into a world that operates on capital influence and power, things you do not possess. I smiled a slow predatory curve of my lips. Please, DeAndre, educate me on power. Gladly, he replied, his chest puffing out with overwhelming arrogance. Jason and I just secured $50 million in Series B funding. We sit in boardrooms with venture capitalists who manage billions. We shake hands with the people who own the skyline of Manhattan. We are building an empire, and my financial strategy is the engine driving it. I am the CFO of a company that is about to go public and make history. And you are a disgruntled ex-wife making a scene at a family wedding because you cannot stand the fact that we won and you lost. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper intended only for me and the immediate family circle. Let me give you a piece of professional advice, Audrey. The financial sector in New York is an incredibly small, incredibly exclusive club. The men and women who run it do not tolerate instability or drama. I have connections now, real connections. I sit at tables you could not even dream of cleaning. I maintained my serene expression, letting him dig his grave deeper with every word. Is that a fact? It is a guarantee, DeAndre hissed. I make one phone call on Monday morning. Just one. I speak to a few of my new investor friends, drop your name, and mention that you are an unstable, vindictive liability who harasses successful executives. That pathetic little desk job of yours? It evaporates. Your career in finance will be over before you even realize what hit you. You will be blacklisted from every reputable accounting firm on the East Coast. You will not be able to get a job balancing the register at a local diner. Brianna let out a cruel, high-pitched giggle, thoroughly enjoying her husband's ruthless dismantling of my supposed livelihood. You tell her, babe. She needs to understand her place. Audrey, you should be thanking us instead of throwing a tantrum. Mom and Dad are retiring early because of DeAndre's brilliance. We are living the dream you threw away, and you are just a sad single mother working a dead-end job. I looked at DeAndre, analyzing the sheer, unchecked ego radiating from him. He truly believed he was untouchable. He believed that the $50 million sitting in his corporate account made him a god among men. He had no idea that the money he was so desperately bragging about was a leash, and I was the one holding it. You are going to make a phone call and end my career, I repeated, ensuring my voice carried the exact tone of polite curiosity. You are going to use your vast, newly acquired connections to blacklist me from the New York financial sector. Try me, DeAndre challenged, his dark eyes flashing with malice. Apologize to my wife. Apologize to Jason and Nicole. Hand that kid over to a babysitter and walk out of here quietly. Show some respect to your betters, Audrey. If you do exactly as I say, I might decide to let you keep your miserable little paycheck. If you refuse, I will personally see to it that you lose everything. My mother Diana crossed her arms, her face a portrait of vindicated fury. You heard him, Audrey. DeAndre has the power to ruin you. Do not test him. He and Jason are the providers for this family now. They are our future. You are nothing but an embarrassment. I stood completely still, surrounded by the hostile glare of my parents, my sister, my ex-husband, and his mistress. They were a pack of wolves circling what they believed to be a wounded, defenseless animal. They were so blinded by their own greed and superficial status that they could not see the massive, insurmountable wave that was about to crash down on their heads. I tightened my hold on Lily, who was watching DeAndre with wide, nervous eyes. I kissed her temple to reassure her, then locked eyes with the arrogant CFO standing before me. My betters, I said softly, testing the word on my tongue as if it were a foreign concept. That is a very bold claim, DeAndre. But before you start making phone calls to end my career, I have a few questions about this financial empire you are so incredibly proud of. I maintained my serene expression, letting him dig his grave deeper with every word. Tell me, DeAndre, as the brilliant chief financial officer of a company that just secured $50 million, how exactly are you calculating your burn rate? Are you factoring in the legal liabilities of your upcoming audits? Or do you just sweep those under the rug to keep the venture capitalists happy? DeAndre narrowed his eyes. His broad shoulders stiffened, but he let out a loud, patronizing laugh. You do not even know what a burn rate is, Audrey. Stick to your spreadsheets. We have the top financial advisors in the country handling our books. We are generating a 300% return on investment by the end of this fiscal year. You cannot even fathom the kind of capital we manage on a daily basis. Brianna could not contain her excitement anymore. She stepped forward, her emerald gown catching the sunlight, and pointed a manicured finger at my chest. You are just trying to sound smart because you are jealous. You are jealous because we are rich and you have nothing. In fact, you should be thanking us, Audrey. Mom and Dad remortgaged this entire estate just to provide the seed money for Jason and DeAndre's company. I paused, my eyes shifting from my sister to my parents. The music from the string quartet seemed to fade into the background as the reality of her words settled over the lawn. You mortgaged the family home, I asked, making sure my voice carried clearly over the hushed whispers of the wedding guests. You put your entire retirement on the line for Jason's startup. Diana lifted her chin, puffing out her chest with absolute pride. Yes, we did, she declared, looking around at the audience she thought was on her side. Because Jason and DeAndre know how to multiply wealth. They guaranteed us a massive return. We are retiring early. Brianna and DeAndre are closing on a mansion in Beverly Hills next month. We are living the dream you threw away, and you are just a sad single mother working a dead-end job. A 300% return, I repeated. The sarcasm in my voice was heavy, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Fascinating. DeAndre, how exactly are you generating a 300% return for early investors when your client acquisition cost is currently outpacing your lifetime value per user by a ratio of 4-to-1? The air was instantly sucked out of the space. The whispers from the crowd turned into audible gasps. The venture capitalists and hedge fund managers standing in the audience instantly recognized the terminology I was using. They knew exactly what those numbers meant. Jason's face drained of color. He looked at DeAndre. DeAndre looked at Jason. A bead of sweat suddenly formed on the chief financial officer's forehead, his tailored suit suddenly looking very stifling. How? Jason swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. How do you know those terms? Where did you hear those numbers? I know a lot of numbers, Jason, I said calmly. I stroked Lily's back, feeling perfectly at peace. For example, I know that claiming explosive organic growth requires actual users, not click farms based out of Eastern Europe. I also know that when you apply for Series B funding, the lead investors require a clean balance sheet. So DeAndre, tell me, how did you hide the $15 million you and Jason routed through 3 separate shell companies in the Cayman Islands last month? DeAndre took a sharp, ragged breath. He stumbled backward, bumping into a cocktail table. The glasses rattled loudly in the quiet space. Shut up, he hissed, his voice cracking. Just shut your mouth right now. Brianna frowned, looking between her husband and my ex-husband. DeAndre, what is she talking about? Tell her to shut up. Call security. DeAndre did not look at his wife. He could not take his eyes off me. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. The swaggering, arrogant executive who had just threatened to ruin my career was entirely gone. In his place stood a terrified man, realizing his walls were caving in. You are making wild, slanderous accusations, Jason stammered, though his voice lacked any real conviction. He was sweating profusely now. His hands shook as he tried to adjust his tie. You hacked our servers. That is a federal crime, Audrey. I will have you arrested. You are a bitter, lonely accountant making up lies because you cannot handle my success. Nicole gripped Jason's arm, her artificial smile replaced by genuine fear. Jason, ignore her. She is just trying to cause a scene. She wants to ruin our day because she has nothing else. Tell them she is crazy. I have plenty, Nicole, I said smoothly. I just do not need to steal my best friend's husband to get it. And I certainly do not need to commit wire fraud to afford a penthouse in Tribeca. Richard stepped forward again, though his aggressive posture had deflated slightly. The specific financial details I had dropped were too precise to be the ramblings of a jealous ex-wife. Audrey, what is this nonsense about shell companies? He demanded, his voice wavering between anger and sudden dread. I reviewed their prospectus myself. The numbers are solid. We invested $4 million into this venture. $4 million, I noted, nodding slowly. That is a substantial amount of leverage to hand over to two men who forged their quarterly revenue projections. Dad, you always prided yourself on being a shrewd, calculating businessman who never made a bad investment. Did you truly not notice the glaring discrepancies in their capital expenditure reports during your due diligence? Or were you just so utterly eager to parade Jason around your prestigious country club that you willingly chose to look the other way and ignore the obvious red flags? Jason lost what little composure he had left. The humiliation of being exposed in front of his new high society peers, combined with the sudden corporate panic, pushed him over the edge. He was no longer trying to look like a sophisticated CEO. He looked like a cornered rat facing total destruction. "You hacking witch!" Jason snarled. He lunged forward, his face contorted with intense rage. He raised his hand, fully intending to grab my arm, or perhaps even strike me right in front of the entire wedding party. He wanted to silence me, to physically stop the truth from spilling out of my mouth and destroying his carefully constructed illusion of wealth. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I held Lily securely against my chest and watched him charge, knowing exactly what was about to happen. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he held all the power. He had absolutely no idea that the real power had just walked onto the lawn behind me. He never made it. Before Jason could close the final foot of distance between us, a massive hand clamped down on his wrist with the sudden stopping force of an industrial vice. The sheer kinetic energy of Jason's lunge was halted instantly. The air rushed out of his lungs in a sharp gasp. The impact was not loud, but the physical finality of it sent a shockwave through the immediate circle of onlookers. Jason's arm was caught midair, frozen in place by a grip that refused to yield a single millimeter. The hand holding him back emerged from the crisp white cuff of a bespoke suit jacket. As the wrist twisted to maintain the iron hold, the ambient light from the crystal chandeliers strung across the grand marquee caught the intricate face of a watch. It was a limited edition Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. In the high-stakes financial sector, that specific timepiece was not just an accessory. It was a declaration of absolute unapproachable power. It was a watch that could not simply be purchased with a sudden influx of stolen startup capital. It was a watch that required an invitation, a legacy, and the kind of wealth that made $50 million look like loose change. Jason struggled, his face twisting in genuine pain as the pressure on his wrist increased. He tried to yank his arm back, but the grip held him as securely as a steel trap. He followed the arm up to the shoulder, his panicked eyes finally meeting the man who had effortlessly stopped his attack. Dominic had arrived. At 38 years old, Dominic stood at 6'3", broad-shouldered and radiating an aura of terrifying authority. He wore a charcoal gray suit tailored to absolute perfection, hugging a physique built on discipline and control. His jawline was sharp, his dark hair immaculately styled, and his expression was a mask of cold, calculated fury. He did not look like a man who had rushed to intervene. He looked like a man who had casually decided to swat a bothersome insect away from his property. The physical contrast between the two men was staggering. Jason was sweating, his face red and blotchy, his breathing erratic and desperate. Dominic was the picture of icy stillness. He did not exert any visible effort to hold Jason in place. He merely stood there, a towering monolith of power, looking down at my ex-husband with eyes that conveyed total unapologetic disdain. Jason whimpered softly as the grip tightened further. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The arrogance that had fueled his entire tirade evaporated, replaced entirely by primal fear. He recognized instantly that he was completely outmatched in every possible way. Dominic did not raise his voice. He did not need to shout to command the attention of every single person standing on that manicured lawn. When he spoke, his voice was a low, gravelly rumble that carried a lethal promise. The sound vibrated through the air, demanding absolute silence from the crowd. "Who gave you permission to raise a hand to my wife?" The word wife hung in the humid air, heavy and undeniable. Jason blinked his eyes, darting frantically from Dominic to me, trying to process the information. His mouth opened and closed, but he could not formulate a response. The pain in his wrist was clearly becoming unbearable, forcing him to drop to one knee just to relieve the pressure. Dominic stared down at him for another agonizing second, letting the humiliation fully settle over Jason. Then, with a casual, dismissive flick of his wrist, Dominic shoved Jason backward. The shove sent Jason stumbling over his own feet. He crashed into Nicole, who let out a startled shriek as she struggled to keep them both from tumbling into a nearby cocktail table. Jason scrambled to right himself, clutching his bruised wrist against his chest, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Dominic stepped smoothly into the space Jason had just occupied, placing his large frame squarely between me and the hostile group of my relatives. He effectively became an impenetrable human shield, cutting off my parents, my sister, and the two fraudulent executives from my personal space. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The pack of wolves that had been circling me suddenly found themselves facing a lion. I felt the familiar, comforting heat of Dominic's presence. He reached back without looking, his large, warm hand, finding the small of my back, resting there in a gesture of unwavering support and protection. He then looked down at Lily, who was still safely secured in my arms. The hardened, dangerous expression on Dominic's face vanished the moment he made eye contact with our daughter. His sharp features softened into an expression of pure, unadulterated paternal adoration. He reached out and gently stroked Lily's dark curls, tucking a stray strand behind her ear. "Daddy," Lily squealed. She threw her small arms out, completely abandoning my neck to reach for him. Dominic smiled, a genuine, breathtaking smile that he reserved entirely for us. He leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to Lily's forehead. "I am right here, little one," he murmured, his voice entirely different from the terrifying tone he had used on Jason. "Daddy is right here. Nobody is going to hurt you or Mommy." The interaction was so natural, so filled with authentic love, that it completely shattered the narrative my family had been desperately trying to build. I had not hired an actor. I had not brought a random child to cause a scene. This was a real family standing united and unbreakable in the face of their toxic attacks. Dominic slowly straightened his posture, pulling his attention away from Lily and turning his glacial stare back to the group. He analyzed Richard, Diana, Brianna, DeAndre, Nicole, and Jason with forensic precision. He cataloged their cheap designer clothes, their panicked expressions, and their desperate need for validation. He looked at them and found them entirely lacking. The high society guests surrounding us had stopped pretending to mingle. The string quartet had finally paused their playing, realizing that the real entertainment was happening right on the lawn. Hedge fund managers and venture capitalists in the crowd stretched their necks trying to get a better look at the man who had just effortlessly derailed the reception. Whispers began to ripple through the audience as recognition dawned on the faces of the most powerful people in the Hamptons. They knew exactly who Dominic was. They knew the weight his name carried in the global financial markets. And they were watching in absolute fascination as my family, blinded by their own superficial greed, continued to dig their own graves right in front of him. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely obliterated. My family thought they had cornered a defenseless woman. They had no idea they had just declared war on a titan. Dominic moved with a fluid, predatory grace that made my skin tingle. He tucked Lily back into the crook of his arm, his movements deliberate and protective. He pulled me closer, his hand firm on my waist, branding me as his own. His cologne, a mix of sandalwood and expensive cedar, enveloped me, cutting through the stifling smell of champagne and desperation that radiated from Jason. Richard. My father was not a man easily intimidated. He had spent decades building his manufacturing empire by steamrolling anyone who got in his way. He saw Dominic not as a titan of industry, but as an inconvenience, a disruption to his curated family moment. Richard puffed out his chest, stepping into Dominic's space. "And who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice raspy with irritation. "Wife. Daddy. Audrey, what is this nonsense? Did you rent a cheap actor from Manhattan to come down here and pretend to be your husband so you would not look like a pathetic single failure at your cousin's wedding?" Brianna let out a shrill, mocking laugh, tossing her hair over her shoulder. She adjusted the strap of her emerald gown, her eyes scanning Dominic's suit with a look of feigned superiority. "Oh my God, Dad, you are right. She totally hired an escort. Audrey, this is beyond pathetic. You bring a fake child and a fake husband just to compete with Jason. You are 33, still single, still a total mess. Nobody here cares who your little friend is. Get him out of our sight." I felt the tension in Dominic's frame, a coiled spring ready to snap. I placed my hand on his forearm, feeling the heat and the rigid muscle underneath. I knew he was seconds away from ruining their lives, but I wanted them to suffer the full weight of their ignorance first. I looked at Brianna, my sister, whose entire identity was built on being the beautiful, perfect sibling. "You know, Brianna, your dedication to being confidently incorrect is the only consistent thing about your entire existence." Dominic did not even look at them. He kept his eyes on me, his gaze softening. "You are okay. I am fine," I said, my pulse finally stabilizing. Behind me, DeAndre was behaving strangely. The CFO who had threatened to ruin my accounting career only minutes ago was now vibrating with suppressed tremors. His hands, which had been so steady and arrogant, were now fisted at his sides. He took a slow, jagged step backward, bumping into a cocktail table and sending a tray of glasses clattering to the floor. The sound was sharp, drawing more attention from the growing crowd of wedding guests. "DeAndre, what is wrong with you?" Brianna snapped, annoyed that her husband was not joining in on the insults. "Tell this rent-a-suit to get out of our way." DeAndre did not look at his wife. He could not take his eyes off Dominic. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. The swaggering, arrogant executive who had just threatened to blacklist me was entirely gone. In his place stood a terrified man, realizing his walls were caving in. "Shut up, Brianna," he hissed, his voice cracking. "Just shut your mouth right now." Jason frowned, rubbing his bruised wrist where Dominic had gripped him. "DeAndre, what the hell is your problem? Call security and get this guy out of here." DeAndre did not look at Jason either. He looked like he was about to lose his lunch. He leaned toward Jason, his voice a frantic, high-pitched wheeze. "Jason, you do not know who that is, do you?" "I do not care if he is the governor." Jason spat, his face still twisted in a mask of impotent rage. "He assaulted me." DeAndre looked like he was staring at a firing squad. He barely managed to get the words out. "That is Dominic. Dominic Prescott, the founder and chairman of Vanguard Group." The name dropped over the group like a live grenade. The firm managed tens of billions in assets. More importantly to Jason and DeAndre, Vanguard Group was the lead investor in their Series B funding. They were the exact firm that had wired $50 million into their corporate accounts just 3 days ago. Diana's mouth fell open in a silent gasp. Richard's aggressive posture instantly deflated, his arms dropping to his sides. Nicole clutched her diamond necklace, looking between Jason and Dominic in absolute paralyzing horror. Jason's face morphed into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The realization hit him like a freight train. He was standing face to face with the man who essentially owned his entire company. The man who held his future, his wealth, and his precious CEO title in the palm of his hand. Dominic finally acknowledged Jason's presence, though not by looking at him directly. He looked past him, his eyes scanning the surrounding party, as if he were checking the decor, before returning his icy gaze to the man who was currently holding $50 million of his firm's money. "Jason, is it?" Dominic asked, his voice smooth and terrifying. "I recall seeing your name on a term sheet somewhere. It was a rather unremarkable presentation, if I remember correctly. Quite derivative." Jason tried to speak, but only a dry, rattling sound escaped his lips. His hands shook so violently he had to put his bourbon glass down on the nearest table, spilling liquid over the pristine tablecloth. "Mr. Prescott," Jason managed to squeak. Sir, it is an absolute honor to meet you. I am Jason, CEO of Nexus Tech. Your firm just led our Series B. We are so incredibly grateful for your trust in our vision. I had no idea you were attending this wedding. Dominic did not offer a hand to shake. He simply stood there, a towering monolith of power looking down at Jason with eyes that conveyed total unapologetic disdain. The shift in the room was palpable. Everyone realized that the balance of power had shifted from the self-proclaimed million-dollar CEO to the man who effectively held his leash. Jason, desperately trying to salvage his pride and his funding, pointed a trembling finger at me. Sir, I have to apologize for the scene. This woman, Audrey, she is my ex-wife. She is severely mentally unstable. She has been stalking me, harassing my family. She is a compulsive liar. Whatever she told you to get you to pretend to be with her, it is a lie. She is a barren, bitter woman who could not handle that I moved on to a better life. Please do not let her instability reflect poorly on my company. Dominic let out a low, dark chuckle. The sound was terrifying. It was not a laugh of amusement. It was the sound of a predator cornering its prey. You think my wife is a liar? Dominic asked, his voice deathly quiet. You think she hired me? Well, sir, with all due respect, it is obvious. Jason stammered, sweat pouring down his temples and soaking his collar. Audrey is just a low-level accountant. There is no way a woman of her status could possibly run in your circles, let alone be married to the chairman of Vanguard. She is playing a sick game to ruin my company. DeAndre grabbed Jason by the shoulder, his fingers digging into the expensive fabric of the tuxedo. He was hyperventilating now, his chest heaving, as if he had just run a marathon. Jason, shut up. DeAndre hissed, his eyes wide with a frantic, unblinking terror. Shut up right now. Do you not understand what is happening? This is the man who owns the air we breathe. He controls the board. He controls our $50 million. My parents, Richard and Diana, stood completely paralyzed. The words $50 million and chairman of Vanguard echoed in their minds, finally breaking through their suburban arrogance. Diana clutched her pearl necklace so tightly, the string looked ready to snap. She stared at Dominic, the realization of his immense wealth and power washing over her like a bucket of ice water. The man they had just called a cheap actor was a billionaire. Brianna instinctively took a step back, her hands hovering over her pregnant belly. Her usual snark and cruelty vanished, replaced by the sheer crushing weight of her husband's panic. DeAndre was never scared of anyone. Seeing him practically hyperventilating over Dominic sent a visible tremor through her entire body. Jason shook DeAndre off his desperation, blinding him to reality. He turned his attention back to Dominic, clasping his hands together in a pathetic display of begging. Mr. Prescott, I beg you to look past her. Do not let her toxic behavior jeopardize our business relationship. I have built Nexus Tech from the ground up. I left her because she was a dead weight. She is a barren, bitter woman who dragged me down emotionally and financially. Nicole and I are building a real family, a real legacy. Audrey is nothing but a resentful failure, trying to sabotage my hard work out of pure spite. She is a liar, sir. I promise you she is a complete fraud. Jason continued his frantic rambling, oblivious to the silent communication between Dominic and me. Sir, you have to believe me. Audrey is manipulating the situation. She has always been jealous of my ambition. When we were married, she could not handle my drive. She lacks vision. She lacks class. I guarantee she somehow found out you were attending this wedding and staged this entire encounter just to make herself look important. DeAndre let out a strangled groan, sinking to his knees on the grass. He pulled at his silk tie, his breathing ragged and shallow. Jason, you are killing us, DeAndre gasped, staring at the ground in absolute defeat. Stop talking. Just stop talking. But Jason could not stop. He was a narcissist watching his fragile empire teeter on the edge of destruction, and his only defense mechanism was to destroy my character. Please, Mr. Prescott. Jason begged, stepping closer, but keeping a safe distance from Dominic's imposing frame. I will do whatever it takes to secure our partnership. I will issue a public apology for this disruption. I will have security remove her from the premises right now. Just say the word. Do not let this crazy woman ruin the $50 million investment your firm just finalized. Dominic stood completely still, letting Jason empty his lungs of every pathetic, cowardly excuse. The billionaire chairman did not blink. He simply let the silence stretch, allowing the crushing weight of Jason's humiliation to settle over the paralyzed wedding guests. Dominic let out a low, dark chuckle that vibrated through the quiet garden. The sound was not born of amusement, but of a chilling absolute dominance. It was the laugh of an apex predator observing a mouse caught in a trap of its own making. Jason Dominic began, his voice smooth and lethally calm. You seem to labor under the delusion that I manage the day-to-day operations of our domestic tech portfolios. You also seem to believe that your amateur pitch deck was compelling enough to secure $50 million from my firm based on its own merit. Jason blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. Sir, I do not understand. The term sheet came directly from Vanguard. It was signed by A. Prescott, the managing partner. Dominic tilted his head slightly, a gesture of mock sympathy. It is astonishing what arrogance can blind a man to. You clearly did not read the corporate structuring documents of the firm that just bought your entire existence. If you had, you would have noticed that I focus exclusively on global acquisitions and international equity. I do not handle domestic startups. I did not approve your funding. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered elite. Richard and Diana exchanged terrified glances, the color completely draining from their faces. DeAndre, still on his knees on the grass, let out a hollow, defeated sound. He knew exactly what was coming. Dominic turned his head slowly to look at me. A genuine, loving smile touched the corners of his mouth, completely transforming his hardened features. He stepped back slightly, offering me the floor with a subtle sweep of his hand. I stepped forward, the silk of my dress brushing against Lily as she rested her head on my shoulder. I looked directly into Jason's panicked eyes. The absolute terror radiating from him was intoxicating. Jason, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent lawn. Dominic is the chairman of Vanguard Group. That is a fact. But he did not sign off on your $50 million. I did. Jason stared at me, his breathing shallow and rapid. He shook his head violently, refusing to accept the reality crashing down on him. No, that is impossible. The signature was A. Prescott. Audrey Prescott. I corrected smoothly, tapping the side of my head. It is amazing what happens when you take your maiden name, marry a billionaire, and merge your own highly successful independent portfolio with his. I dropped your last name the minute the ink dried on our divorce papers 5 years ago. I took a step closer, enjoying the way Jason shrank back from me. Did you really think I spent half a decade weeping in a cubicle? You broke my heart, Jason. But in doing so, you handed me the fuel I needed to conquer New York. The senior partner, the head of domestic ventures, and the majority shareholder of Vanguard Group, who personally approved the funds for your company, is me. The silence that followed my revelation was absolute. I stepped away from the protective warmth of my husband and handed Lily to Dominic. He took her effortlessly, keeping his glacial stare fixed on the men crumbling before us. I turned to a nearby catering table, swept aside a silver tray of caviar, and picked up the designer clutch I had placed there earlier. From inside the oversized envelope bag, I pulled out a thick leather-bound folder sealed with a bright red confidential sticker. I tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud that made my mother flinch. I told you I know a lot of numbers, Jason. When your little startup applied for funding at Vanguard 6 months ago, my acquisitions team brought the file directly to my desk. I recognized the company name immediately. Dominic wanted to reject the pitch outright on principle alone, but I told him no. I said, let us see what my ex-husband considers a billion-dollar idea. So I personally approved the initial due diligence phase. Jason stared at the red sticker, his mouth hanging open. You played me. I strung you along. I corrected, stepping closer to the table. You said leaving me was your best move, Jason. But your actual best move was walking blindly into my trap. You spent the last 6 months thinking you were outsmarting a room full of junior analysts. You bragged during your video pitches, puffing your chest while answering questions from blank screens. You never realized I was the one feeding those questions to my team. DeAndre let out a guttural groan from his place on the grass, keeping his face buried in his hands. Oh my God. The forensic audit. You ran a forensic audit. A highly invasive, completely untraceable forensic audit. I confirmed, locking my eyes onto the trembling chief financial officer. You two boys got incredibly greedy. You knew your actual user engagement was dropping by 20% month over month. Your product was failing. So, DeAndre, as the brilliant financial mind of Nexus Tech, you decided to create 3 ghost entities to artificially pump fake capital back into your own revenue streams. You made it look like explosive organic growth to trick my board into signing that term sheet. Jason was shaking so violently his knees knocked together. Audrey, please, we can talk about this. We can explain everything. It is just aggressive accounting. Everyone does it. Aggressive accounting is finding a tax loophole, Jason, I said, my voice rising just enough to command the entire lawn. What you did was manufacture fake clients to secure corporate funding. I approved the $50 million for one very simple reason. I wanted to give you exactly enough rope to hang yourself, and you took it without a single moment of hesitation. The wealthy investors surrounding us began to step backward, physically distancing themselves from Jason. Nobody wanted to be standing near a CEO who had just admitted to federal fraud in front of the chairman of Vanguard. Nicole pulled at her hair, her pristine image entirely destroyed. You set us up, she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. You are a vindictive monster. You wanted to ruin our lives because you are jealous of our love, jealous of a man who has to steal to buy you a penthouse. I laughed, a sharp sound that echoed across the garden. I am not jealous, Nicole. I am just conducting business. I tapped the leather-bound folder with my index finger, drawing every eye back to the damning evidence resting on the table. The inflated user metrics were just the appetizer, Jason. A desperate attempt to secure the funding you needed to maintain the illusion of your immense wealth. But the main course was what you did the very moment Vanguard released the capital. I stepped around the catering table, closing the distance between myself and my ex-husband. He recoiled as if my proximity physically burned him. Our $50 million hit your corporate accounts at exactly 9 in the morning on Wednesday, I stated, raising my voice so the venture capitalists lingering in the crowd could hear every single syllable. By 10:30, you and DeAndre initiated 4 separate wire transfers totaling $15 million. You routed that stolen capital through 3 offshore shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. DeAndre let out a high-pitched wheeze from the grass. He was rocking back and forth, clutching his stomach as if he had been stabbed. Jason opened his mouth, but only a dry clicking sound emerged. You disguised those massive transfers as vendor payouts. I continued my delivery, rhythmic and punishing. You created fake invoices for Apex server architecture and global cloud solutions. You listed them as essential infrastructure upgrades needed to support your supposedly explosive user growth. But my audit team tracked those routing numbers. Those servers do not exist. Those tech companies do not exist. They are simply bank accounts controlled entirely by you and DeAndre, designed to siphon investor money directly into your personal portfolios. Nicole gripped Jason by the lapels of his custom tuxedo. Her manicured nails dug into the expensive fabric. Jason, what is she talking about? You said the money was for the company expansion. You said that is how we were paying for the Tribeca penthouse. Jason aggressively shoved Nicole away, his face twisted in a hideous mixture of rage and terror. Get off me. You knew about the offshore accounts. You are the one who demanded the penthouse. You are the one who needed the $2 million down payment to impress your country club friends. I did not know you stole it, Nicole shrieked back. Her pristine image was entirely shattered. She stumbled backward into a waiter, sending a tray of champagne glasses crashing to the grass. The sound of breaking crystal was loud, sharp, and perfectly fitting for the moment. You did not just steal to buy a luxury penthouse, Jason, I interjected, keeping the focus entirely on his financial crimes. You used federal wire systems to commit corporate embezzlement. You stole from a federally regulated venture capital fund. That makes it a federal crime. And as the lead investor and senior partner of Vanguard Group, I have a strict fiduciary duty to report fraud the absolute second I uncover it. Jason dropped to his knees, joining DeAndre on the manicured lawn. He reached out his hands, grasping desperately at the hem of my dress. "Audrey, please!" he begged, tears streaming down his face, ruining his perfectly curated CEO persona. "I will give it all back. I will reverse the wire transfers right now. We can call the bank. Just keep this in-house. Please, for the sake of the family, do not destroy my life over a mistake." "A mistake," I echoed, letting out a sharp, incredulous laugh. I looked over at my parents. Richard and Diana were trembling, clutching each other as they watched the golden boy they had chosen over me beg like a pathetic criminal. "A mistake is forgetting to file a quarterly report, Jason. Forging revenue projections and wiring $15 million to the Caymans is a highly calculated, deliberate felony." I checked the face of my watch, noting the time with absolute precision. "Which is exactly why 2 hours ago I filed a formal expedited complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC reviewed the forensic audit files and immediately issued an emergency federal injunction." The words "federal injunction" hung over the garden, suffocating the last remaining drops of hope Jason possessed. "Your corporate accounts are frozen," I announced, delivering the final blow. "Your personal checking accounts are frozen. The escrow account holding the deposit for your Tribeca penthouse is frozen. Every single asset tied to your name and Nicole's name has been locked down by the federal government. You do not have $50 million, Jason. You do not even have 50 cents to buy a cup of coffee." Nicole let out a blood-curdling scream. She fell to her knees beside Jason, beating her fists against his chest. "No, no, no, no. The closing is on Monday. We put down a non-refundable $2 million deposit. We lose everything if we do not close. Jason, tell me she is lying. Tell me we still have the money." Jason could not speak. He just stared blankly at the grass, his chest heaving as the reality of his total financial ruin washed over him. Nicole grabbed the diamond tennis necklace resting against her collarbone. She ripped it off her neck with such force that the clasp snapped. She threw the heavy jewelry at Jason's face. It bounced off his cheek and landed in the dirt. "You promised me, Nicole," howled, her voice raw and unhinged. "You said you were a millionaire. You said leaving Audrey was the best thing that ever happened to you because she was holding you back. You are a fraud. I cannot be married to a felon. I cannot be poor." She collapsed onto the grass, sobbing hysterically, completely ignoring the fact that hundreds of the wealthiest people in New York were watching her breakdown. Her luxurious lifestyle, built entirely on the foundation of my betrayal and federal crimes, had just vanished into thin air. She was left with nothing but a ruined reputation and a husband bound for federal prison. DeAndre, still curled on the ground, began to weep loudly. The arrogant executive who had threatened to destroy my career just minutes ago was now a broken, sobbing mess. I looked down at the three of them wallowing in the grass. The satisfaction I felt was deep, pure, and incredibly cold. I had not just taken back my power, I had surgically dismantled their entire universe, using nothing but the very ambition and intelligence they had once mocked. Brianna finally broke out of her paralyzed state. The golden child of the family, the sister who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself, suddenly realized that her perfect, wealthy future was evaporating. She stumbled forward, her emerald gown catching on the heel of her shoe, and grabbed my arm. Her manicured nails dug into my skin with desperate force. "Audrey, please!" Brianna shrieked, her face contorted with panic. She pointed to her pregnant belly, using her unborn child as a shield, the way she always used our parents' favoritism. "You cannot do this. I am pregnant. DeAndre is going to be a father. You cannot send the father of your niece or nephew to jail just because you are holding a grudge against Jason." I looked down at her grasping hands. Then calmly and deliberately, I pried her fingers off my arm, one by one. I looked at her with absolute detachment, feeling no familial bond, no sympathy, and certainly no mercy. "I am not sending him to jail, Brianna," I said, my voice cutting through the humid air like a razor. "His own greed is sending him to jail. And do not you dare use your unborn child as a shield for federal crimes. You stood there 5 minutes ago and bragged about moving to Beverly Hills on money your husband stole from my firm. Your child will just have to learn a very difficult lesson early in life. Actions have consequences. But DeAndre did not know. Brianna wailed, dropping to her knees next to her husband. She grabbed DeAndre by the shoulders, shaking him violently. Tell her, DeAndre. Tell her Jason forced you to do it. Tell her you did not know the money was stolen. DeAndre could not even look at his wife. He kept his face buried in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I stepped forward, towering over my brother-in-law. I would not let him hide behind his weeping wife. Do not insult my intelligence, Brianna, I commanded. DeAndre is the chief financial officer. He is not some naive intern who accidentally clicked the wrong button on a wire transfer. He orchestrated the entire scheme. I turned my gaze back to the leather-bound folder on the catering table. DeAndre. I have the digital footprints. I have the IP addresses. I know exactly which encrypted network you used to access the offshore accounts. You did not just authorize the transfers. You actively forged the signatures of 2 imaginary board members to bypass the dual authentication security protocols required by Vanguard Group. You fabricated quarterly revenue reports, doctored the user acquisition metrics, and lied directly to my acquisitions team during the final due diligence meetings. You built a financial house of cards, and you left your fingerprints on every single deck. DeAndre let out a strangled cry, curling tighter into a ball on the grass. The arrogant executive who had promised to blacklist me from the financial sector was now nothing more than a terrified criminal facing decades behind bars. Brianna looked up at me, her eyes wide with a frantic, uncomprehending terror. "But we are family!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You cannot do this to your own family. Mom and Dad will never forgive you. We will disown you." I laughed, a sharp, genuine sound that echoed over the lawn. Disown me, Brianna. You cannot disown someone who already walked away from your toxic circus 5 years ago. You do not have the power to disown me anymore. I own you. I own the debt your husband created, and I own the evidence that will put him away for a very long time. Dominic stepped closer, his presence a silent, terrifying reinforcement of my words. He looked down at DeAndre with utter disgust. "You boys made a fatal miscalculation," Dominic said, his deep voice vibrating with absolute authority. "You thought you were stealing from a faceless corporate entity. You thought you were pulling a fast one on a group of disconnected investors. You did not realize you were stealing from my wife. And nobody steals from Audrey Prescott and walks away to buy a mansion in Beverly Hills." DeAndre finally looked up. His face was a mess of tears and sweat. He raised his shaking hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Mr. Prescott, please," he begged, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I will cooperate. I will testify against Jason. I will give you everything you need to convict him. Just let me walk away. I have a baby on the way. I cannot go to prison." Jason, hearing DeAndre offer him up on a silver platter, snapped out of his own shock. He lunged at DeAndre, tackling him to the ground. "You traitor," Jason roared, throwing a sloppy, uncoordinated punch that glanced off DeAndre's shoulder. "You were the one who set up the shell companies. It was your idea." The 2 men, the brilliant CEO and the arrogant CFO, rolled on the grass in their custom tuxedos, fighting like street thugs. It was a pathetic, undignified display. They were turning on each other the exact second their fraudulent empire collapsed, proving they possessed no loyalty, no honor, and no real business acumen. Dominic did not even blink. He simply snapped his fingers. The 3 private security contractors who had escorted my lawyer into the venue immediately stepped forward. They hauled Jason and DeAndre off the ground, pulling them apart and forcing them to their feet. The security guards held the 2 men firmly in place, ending the scuffle with professional efficiency. "Let them go," I instructed the guards. "We do not need to detain them." Jason and DeAndre stood there, panting, their expensive suits ruined with grass stains and dirt. They looked at me, a flicker of desperate hope igniting in their eyes. They thought I was showing mercy. They thought I was letting them go. "You are dropping the charges!" Jason gasped, wiping a streak of blood from his split lip. "Audrey, thank you. I swear you will get every penny back." I tilted my head, studying him, as if he were a fascinating, incredibly stupid specimen. "Dropping the charges. Jason, I am a venture capitalist, not a charity. I am not detaining you because it is no longer my jurisdiction. I raised my hand and pointed toward the massive wrought iron gates at the entrance of the Hamptons estate. The Securities and Exchange Commission handles the asset freezes and the civil penalties. I explained, my voice carrying a chilling, absolute finality. But corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and the forgery of federal financial documents fall under a completely different department. Brianna grabbed her stomach, her breathing becoming shallow and erratic. "What are you saying?" she whimpered. "I am saying that I filed the criminal complaint at the exact same time I filed the SEC injunction," I replied. The wheels of federal justice move surprisingly fast when you have a billionaire chairman making the phone calls. I looked directly into DeAndre's terrified eyes. "You wanted to use your connections in the New York financial sector to ruin my career." DeAndre. "Well, I used my connections to end your freedom. The FBI White-Collar Crime Division has been reviewing the forensic audit since yesterday morning. They do not just freeze your bank accounts. They come for your passports." The color drained entirely from Jason and DeAndre's faces. They turned their heads slowly, looking toward the long gravel driveway leading up to the estate. "They are not coming tomorrow," I added softly. "They are not coming next week. They are waiting for you right now at the estate gates." As if summoned by my words, the distinct sound of heavy vehicle doors slamming shut echoed from the front of the property. Red and blue lights began to pulse, casting a harsh rhythmic glare against the pristine white columns of the Hamptons estate. My mother Diana let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. She scrambled up from the grass, her expensive heels sinking into the mud, and grabbed her husband's arm. "Richard! Richard, do something, call the bank. Call our broker right now and pull the investment." I looked at my mother with genuine clinical fascination. "Mom, do you honestly believe you can log into a portal and hit withdraw on a federally frozen account?" Diana whipped her head toward me, her eyes wide and bloodshot. "You said the SEC froze Jason's accounts, not ours. Our money is safe. We invested legally. We have a contract guaranteeing our principal amount plus interest." I let out a sharp sigh, shaking my head at her profound financial ignorance. "Mom, when you invest in a company that is operating as a criminal enterprise, your money becomes part of the crime. Jason and DeAndre commingled your $4 million with the venture capital funds they stole from my firm. They used your retirement savings to pay for the offshore shell companies and the fake server architecture. Your money is not sitting in a vault waiting to be withdrawn. It is evidence." Richard's chest heaved. He stumbled forward, clutching his lapels. "Evidence? What do you mean, evidence, Audrey? We gave them everything. We took a secondary mortgage on this estate. We liquidated the 401k. We sold the mutual funds. DeAndre said it was a bridge round. He said we would double our net worth before the IPO next year." I turned my attention to my father. "You handed $4 million to a man who could not even remain faithful to his wife, and you trusted a CFO whose only qualification was kissing up to your ego. Dad, in a federal fraud liquidation, unsecured equity investors are at the absolute bottom of the food chain. Vanguard Group is the secured creditor. The federal government will seize whatever assets are left to pay the fines. You are not getting a single cent back." Diana let out a guttural, animalistic wail. She turned her fury away from me and lunged directly at Jason. "You thief!" she screamed, her perfectly manicured hands clawing at Jason's ruined tuxedo jacket. "You promised us. You said you were a visionary. You took our retirement. Give it back. Give me my money back right now." Jason, already paralyzed by the flashing police lights at the gate, shoved my mother away with brutal force. "Get off me, Diana," he yelled, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You gave me that money because you were greedy. You wanted a bigger house and a country club membership. Do not act like you were doing me a favor. You just wanted to ride my coattails." Nicole, furious and stripped of her glamorous facade, turned on my mother. "You encouraged him!" Nicole shrieked, pointing at Diana. "You sat at my dining table and told him he was brilliant. You told him Audrey was a dead weight and he deserved better. You hyped him up so you could steal his profits, and now you are playing the victim." Richard caught Diana before she could fall into the mud again, but his eyes remained locked on me. He ignored Jason and Nicole completely. His survival instinct was overriding his pride. He pushed past his crying wife and pregnant daughter, closing the distance between us, until Dominic took a deliberate, threatening step forward. Richard stopped instantly, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of submission. "Audrey, please," Richard begged, his voice stripped of all its former authority. "You have to help us. You are married to Dominic Prescott. You are the senior partner of Vanguard. $4 million is nothing to you. It is pocket change. You can write a check right now and clear the mortgage. You can save the estate. We are your parents. You cannot let us lose our home." I stared at the man who had ruled my life with an iron fist, dictating my worth based on my ability to obey his commands. I looked at the woman who had stood by silently while I was verbally abused, only stepping in to remind me of my failures. "Save the estate?" I asked, softly tilting my head. "Why would I do that, Dad?" "So you can continue hosting dinner parties and bragging about your fake wealth. So you can invite your friends over and pretend you built an empire, when in reality you are just a terrible investor who fell for a Ponzi scheme." "We made a mistake," Richard pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. "We trusted the wrong people. But we are family. We can sign over the equity to Vanguard. We can make it a formal corporate loan. Just do not let the bank take the property." "You do not have any equity left to sign over," I corrected him coldly. "And you did not just trust the wrong people, Dad. You actively chose them over your own daughter. 5 years ago, I came to you broken. I had just lost my marriage, my home, and my dignity. I asked you for a loan to get a small apartment in the city so I could start over. Do you remember what you said to me?" Richard looked down at his shoes, his jaw trembling. "Audrey, I was trying to teach you a lesson." "You taught me a lesson, all right," I said, my voice cutting through the night air like a blade. "You told me that I was a bad investment. You said you do not throw good money after bad. You told me I needed to learn how the real world works." Well, Dad, welcome to the real world. In the real world, when you leverage your primary residence to fund a criminal enterprise, the bank takes your house. Diana pushed herself away from Richard and crawled toward me on the grass. "Audrey, I will do anything. I will apologize to you every day for the rest of my life. I will tell everyone how successful you are. Just do not let us become homeless. Brianna needs a place to stay. DeAndre is going to prison and she is pregnant. She needs her family home." I looked at Brianna, who was sobbing uncontrollably into DeAndre's shoulder. "Brianna is 30 years old," I stated coldly. "She can get a job. She can rent an apartment. Millions of single mothers do it every single day without the luxury of a Hamptons estate to fall back on. She will survive. And if she does not, that is absolutely not my problem." Richard reached out his hand, shaking violently in the cool night air. He stopped just short of touching my dress, clearly remembering Dominic's earlier intervention. He dropped his hand, opting instead to clasp his palms together in a posture of desperate prayer. "Audrey, please listen to yourself," Richard pleaded, his voice cracking under the weight of his impending ruin. "You are speaking out of anger. You are letting old wounds blind you to what is truly important. We are your family. We are your flesh and blood. You cannot just erase us from your life because of a financial dispute. Blood is thicker than water. Family is the only thing that truly matters in this world. When everything else falls away, family is all you have left." Diana nodded frantically, her tears cutting fresh tracks through her expensive foundation. "She is right, Audrey. We gave you life. I carried you. I raised you. You owe us at least a shred of loyalty. We made a terrible mistake trusting Jason, but we did it because we thought we were building a legacy for all of us, for the family name. You cannot turn your back on your own blood. It goes against everything natural. It goes against God." I stood perfectly still, letting their desperate, pathetic appeals wash over me. I looked at the red and blue lights reflecting off the grand facade of the estate they were about to lose. I looked at the terrified faces of my parents, stripped of their arrogance and reduced to begging. "Loyalty." I repeated, testing the word on my tongue as if it were a foreign concept. "You want to talk about loyalty and blood? Let us talk about blood, Dad. Let us go back exactly 5 years ago." It was a Tuesday evening. It was raining. I stood in your pristine living room holding a single suitcase, having just left the husband who was currently sleeping with my best friend. Richard swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously toward the ground. Audrey, that was a long time ago. We were different people then. We thought we were giving you tough love. We thought you needed a push to fix your marriage. Do not interrupt me, I commanded, my voice slicing through his pathetic excuse. I stood in your living room and I begged you for a loan. I needed $10,000 to secure a lease on a small apartment so I would not have to sleep in my car. I cried. I reminded you that I was your daughter. I reminded you of our blood. Do you remember what you said to me, Richard? He closed his eyes, a silent tear escaping and running down his weathered cheek. He knew exactly what he had said. He knew there was no escaping it. Since your memory seems to be failing, I will refresh it for you. I continued, my tone clinical and detached. You stood over me, buttoning your custom suit, and you said, Audrey, we only invest in winning portfolios. You told me that failure is contagious, and you refused to let my instability infect your household. You said I had brought shame upon the family name by failing to keep my husband satisfied. You told me I was a depreciating asset. Diana let out a loud sob, covering her face with her hands. Please, Audrey, stop. We were wrong. We were so incredibly wrong. We were blind to the truth about Jason. Oh, I am not finished, Diana, I said, turning my piercing gaze directly to her. You stood right next to him. I looked at you, my own mother, expecting some shred of maternal instinct to kick in. Instead, you looked at me with pure disgust. You said a woman's worth is measured by the home she keeps and the family she nurtures. You told me I had failed at my fundamental biological duty and therefore I was entirely useless to you. You told me to pack my bags and leave because failures do not belong in your pristine world. The silence that followed was suffocating. The wealthy guests who had not yet fled the property stood in stunned silence, witnessing the absolute dismantling of my parents' carefully curated public image. The sheer hypocrisy of their current begging was laid bare for the entire Hamptons elite to see. So you see, I said smoothly, pacing slowly in front of them, I am simply applying your own airtight financial logic to our current situation. I am evaluating my investments. You are asking me to inject $4 million of my personal capital into a severely depreciating asset. You are asking me to save two people who have proven themselves to be morally bankrupt, financially incompetent, and entirely toxic to my overall well-being. I stopped pacing and stood directly in front of Richard. By your own definition, Dad, you are a failure. You backed a criminal. You lost your home. You lost your retirement. You let your greed blind you to basic due diligence. Failure is contagious, Richard. I absolutely refuse to let your instability infect my household. I only invest in winning portfolios, and you are the worst investment I have ever seen in my entire career. Richard dropped to his knees, joining his sobbing wife on the damp grass. He reached for his chest, his breathing shallow and rapid. Audrey, we will die on the streets. We have nowhere to go. You cannot be this cruel. We are your parents. We gave you everything. I tilted my head, looking down at them with absolute terrifying indifference. You lost the right to call yourselves my parents 5 years ago. You surrendered that title the moment you chose a cheating son-in-law over your own desperate daughter. You traded your parental rights for a country club membership and a false sense of superiority. You are not my parents. You are simply two strangers who share my DNA. And sharing DNA does not entitle you to my bank account. I turned to Dominic, who had been watching the execution with quiet, unwavering support. He held Lily securely, shielding her from the harsh reality of the people weeping on the ground. My family is right here. I stated, my voice carrying a profound sense of peace. My family is a husband who defends my honor without question. My family is a daughter who runs to me with pure, unconditional love. You people are nothing but a cautionary tale about the destructive nature of unchecked greed. Diana reached out a trembling hand, her voice a fragile, broken whisper. Audrey, please, is there no part of you that still loves us? Is there no mercy left in your heart for the people who raised you? I looked at the woman who had birthed me, feeling absolutely nothing. The emotional cord had been completely severed. There was no anger left, only the cold, hard facts of the reality they had built. "I have plenty of mercy, Diana," I replied calmly, "but I reserve my mercy for people who actually deserve it. You built your entire life on the principle of transactional love. You only loved people when they could do something to elevate your status. Now you have absolutely nothing left to offer. The transaction is complete. The account is officially closed." I turned my back on them for the final time. I did not care where they slept tonight. I did not care how they paid their legal fees. I did not care if they spent the rest of their lives regretting their choices. They were entirely, utterly irrelevant to my existence. "Let us go," I said to Dominic, signaling to our security team that we were ready to depart. "I have spent enough time dealing with bad investments today." I turned my back and began walking toward the waiting Maybach. Dominic kept one protective arm around my waist, his other arm securely holding Lily. We did not rush. We strolled across the manicured lawn with the absolute calm of people who had just successfully taken out the trash. Behind us, the federal agents moved with aggressive, calculated efficiency. The lead agent signaled, and half a dozen more plainclothes officers poured out of the unmarked vehicles, swarming the lavish reception area. The string quartet had long since stopped playing. In their place, the sharp, authoritative commands of federal law enforcement echoed across the Hamptons estate. Jason was hauled to his feet. He thrashed against the agents, his custom tuxedo ripping at the shoulder seam. He was no longer the arrogant tech visionary. He was a cornered, desperate fraudster throwing a public tantrum. "Do you know who I am?" Jason shrieked, spit flying from his lips, as an agent shoved him face first against a cocktail table to secure the handcuffs. "I am a CEO, call my legal team. You cannot do this to me in front of these people. You have the right to remain silent," the agent recited loudly, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the horrified crowd. "I suggest you use it." DeAndre offered no such resistance. The arrogant chief financial officer was weeping openly, his chest heaving with deep, ugly sobs. Two agents hauled him up from the dirt by his armpits. His legs gave out, forcing the officers to practically drag his limp, pathetic body across the lawn. Brianna chased after them, her emerald gown stained with mud, screaming for someone to help her husband. Nobody moved a single muscle to assist her. The social destruction of my family unfolded in brilliant, agonizing high definition. The elite guests, the venture capitalists, the hedge fund managers, and the Hampton socialites did not look away. They pulled out their smartphones. Camera flashes illuminated the twilight. High society thrives on watching the mighty fall, and my family was providing the ultimate main event. I watched a prominent venture capitalist, a man my father had spent months trying to impress, pull out his phone and immediately dial his wealth manager. "Sell everything connected to Nexus Tech," the man ordered loudly, looking at my father with unvarnished disgust. "Block his number. They are completely toxic." Diana scrambled to her feet, desperately trying to shield her face with her expensive clutch. She reached out to a group of women she played tennis with at the country club, begging them for help. The women literally turned their backs on her, stepping away as if my mother were carrying a highly contagious disease. In a matter of minutes, my parents went from aspiring socialites to absolute pariahs. They were financially ruined, publicly humiliated, and permanently blacklisted from every circle of influence they had sacrificed me to join. Nicole stood frozen near the shattered champagne glasses. She stared at Jason being shoved roughly into the back of a federal vehicle, her dreams of a Tribeca penthouse dissolving into the flashing red and blue lights. She looked around at the judgmental stares of the elite crowd and realized she was nothing but the mistress of a disgraced felon. I turned away from the spectacle of her ruined life and stepped smoothly into the waiting Maybach. The heavy door clicked shut instantly, silencing the sirens, the screaming, and the frantic whispers of the wedding guests. Inside the spacious, climate-controlled cabin, the world was perfectly calm. Dominic settled into the plush leather seat beside me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. Lily was already dozing peacefully against his chest, completely untouched by the hurricane that had just leveled my former family. The driver merged seamlessly onto the highway, leaving the Hamptons estate and the wreckage of my past far behind us. The wheels of federal justice grind exceedingly fine, And the aftermath of that evening was swift and absolutely brutal. The fast forward over the next 12 months played out exactly as my forensic audit had predicted. The SEC investigation was a total bloodbath. Jason and DeAndre tried to turn on each other during the trial, pointing fingers and offering desperate plea deals that the federal prosecutors flatly rejected. The evidence I handed over was simply too comprehensive to ignore. They were both convicted of federal wire fraud and securities fraud, receiving maximum 10-year sentences in a medium security federal penitentiary. The arrogant million-dollar CEO and his swaggering CFO were reduced to inmate numbers, stripped of their bespoke suits, and forced to wear matching khaki jumpsuits for the next decade. My parents faced a financial reckoning that absolutely destroyed their precious social standing. Because they had remortgaged the estate to fund a criminal enterprise, the bank foreclosed on the property within 90 days. Their retirement funds were entirely seized to pay off the defrauded investors. Richard and Diana were evicted from the Hamptons and forced to move into a cramped, deeply depressing two-bedroom apartment in a decaying building on the outskirts of the city. Their country club friends blocked their numbers overnight. Their social circle ostracized them completely. They went from hosting lavish dinner parties to clipping coupons and loudly arguing over utility bills. Brianna, heavily pregnant and legally tethered to a convicted felon, had no choice but to move into that tiny, suffocating apartment with them. She is now raising her child in the exact environment of failure they had all once mocked me for supposedly representing. As for Nicole, the grand illusion of her stolen luxury evaporated in an instant. Without Jason's fraudulent wealth to prop her up, she was left drowning in astronomical credit card debt and the crippling legal fees from Jason's failed defense. She was forced to file for bankruptcy and move out of the city entirely. The woman who had sneered at my career as a low-level accountant was now working back-to-back shifts as a minimum wage waitress at a dingy diner in upstate New York, spending her days wiping down sticky tables just to afford her bare minimum rent. Every single one of them had chased greed and false prestige, and the universe had handed them exactly what they earned. Exactly 1 year later, I stood on the sun-drenched terrace of our private villa in Lake Como, Italy. The morning light glittered across the deep blue water, reflecting onto the ancient stone walls of the estate. The air smelled of fresh espresso and blooming jasmine. It was a world away from the suffocating manicured lawns of the Hamptons and the toxic expectations of my past. Inside the villa, I could hear the sound of genuine, unfiltered joy. Dominic was in the kitchen teaching Lily how to flip pancakes. Her bright musical laughter echoed through the high-ceilinged rooms, completely devoid of the anxiety or performance pressure that had defined my own childhood. She did not have to earn her place in this house. She did not have to prove her worth to secure her father's affection. She was simply loved fiercely and unconditionally. I leaned against the marble balustrade, taking a slow, deep breath of the crisp Italian air. The contrast between the life I had escaped and the life I had built was staggering. For 33 years, I had allowed myself to be defined by people who viewed love as a transactional currency. My parents had treated me as a depreciating asset, a disappointment who failed to deliver the social dividends they so desperately craved. They demanded loyalty based entirely on the coincidence of shared genetics, using the concept of family as a weapon to keep me compliant and small. Over the past 12 months, they had tried to re-enter my life. As their financial ruin became absolute, the desperate voicemails had started flooding my phone. Richard begging for a loan to cover his bankruptcy lawyers, Diana weeping into the receiver, pleading with me to remember the childhood she had completely rewritten in her own mind to sound nurturing. Brianna even tried to reach out, demanding I set up a trust fund for her newborn baby, since her husband was locked away in a federal penitentiary. They invoked the word blood like it was a magic spell that would instantly erase decades of emotional abuse and betrayal. They thought the biological connection meant I owed them my wealth, my peace, and my sanity. They truly believed that if they cried hard enough, the dutiful, subservient daughter they had discarded would return to rescue them from the consequences of their own spectacular greed. I listened to exactly one of those voicemails before changing my phone number, blocking their email addresses, and instructing my private security team to turn them away if they ever dared to approach my properties in New York. I felt no guilt. I felt absolutely no obligation to save drowning people who had spent their entire lives trying to hold my head under the water. The financial empire I controlled was not a charity for toxic relatives. Cutting out toxic people is often framed as a tragic, heartbreaking necessity. But standing here watching the calm waters of the lake, I realized it is actually the most empowering, beautiful act of self-preservation a person can commit. Setting a firm, impenetrable boundary is not an act of cruelty. It is a declaration of self-worth. It is looking at the people who thrive on your pain and deciding that your future is no longer available for their consumption. It is realizing that you can survive without the people who convinced you that you needed them to breathe. I turned my head as Dominic stepped out onto the terrace. He carried 2 cups of espresso, handing one to me before wrapping his free arm around my waist. He looked out at the water, his presence a steady grounding force. He was a man of immense power, yet he never once used it to diminish me. He built me up. He celebrated my ambition, respected my intellect, and protected our peace with ruthless efficiency. He showed me what a true equal partnership looked like, a stark contrast to the deceitful, insecure boys of my past. Mommy Lily ran out onto the terrace, her face smeared with a small streak of chocolate. She launched herself at my legs, wrapping her arms around me just as she had done on that chaotic lawn a year ago. I set my espresso down and scooped her up into my arms. I kissed the chocolate off her cheek, making her giggle uncontrollably. Looking at my daughter, I finally understood the true definition of family. Family is not determined by a birth certificate. Family is not an obligation you are born into and forced to endure. Family is entirely chosen. Family consists of the people who stand fiercely by your side when you have nothing, and who celebrate you without a single ounce of jealousy when you conquer the world. It is the people who respect your boundaries, who elevate your spirit, and who would never dream of leveraging your pain for their own gain. I had to lose the people who shared my DNA to find the people who actually shared my heart. I looked at Dominic, then at Lily, and felt a profound, unshakable sense of gratitude. The empire I had built in the financial sector was impressive, but the peace I had cultivated in my personal life was my greatest triumph. I had burned the toxic forest to the ground, and from the ashes, I had grown a magnificent, impenetrable sanctuary. To anyone watching this who is currently suffocating under the weight of a toxic family, listen to me carefully. You do not owe your abusers your future just because you share a last name. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep their illusions warm. You have the right to walk away. You have the absolute right to demand respect, and if they refuse to give it, you have the power to build a life completely beyond their reach. The moment you stop seeking validation from people who are committed to misunderstanding you is the exact moment you become unstoppable. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and cut toxic relatives out of your life to protect your own peace? What was the breaking point that finally made you walk away and choose yourself? Share your story and your victories in the comments section below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of people taking their power back. Remember, your peace is priceless, and your future is always worth fighting for. The most profound takeaway from Audrey's journey, and indeed from countless similar stories of survival, is the realization that biology does not automatically earn someone the title of family. For far too long, society has pushed the toxic narrative that we must endlessly endure emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and blatant disrespect simply because the perpetrators share our DNA. However, true family is not a biological obligation you are forced to endure, it is an active, ongoing choice. Toxic family structures often rely on casting one person as the perpetual scapegoat while elevating another as the flawless golden child, creating an environment where love is strictly transactional. In these hostile environments, your worth is measured only by how well you serve their selfish needs. We are deeply conditioned to believe that setting firm boundaries or walking away is an act of betrayal against our own blood, Yet, this story teaches us that severing these toxic ties is actually the ultimate act of self-love and self-preservation. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you, and you certainly cannot negotiate with people who view your personal destruction as acceptable collateral damage for their own success. True success is not just about achieving financial independence or exacting a perfect calculated revenge on those who deeply wronged you. Rather, it is about completely reclaiming your own narrative. It is about having the strength to surround yourself with a chosen family, people who stand fiercely by your side in your darkest moments, and celebrate your victories without a single ounce of jealousy. Take a hard look at the relationships in your life today, and have the courage to walk away from any table where respect is no longer being served